Hello, everyone tuning in from around the world. We're thrilled to have participants from nearly 50 countries joining us today. So, whether you're sipping a coffee in Brussels, cracking open a cold one in Sydney, or still shaking off sleep in New York, welcome to the QCTR Q3 event. I'm Caroline Vreuren from the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium. I'm stepping in for Pedro, who's currently off doing what he does best, fighting cybercrime. So today, I will be your host as we dive into the new normal of cyber threats, scale, speed, and AI. It was a bit of a last-minute switch, so thanks in advance for your flexibility. Now, let's take a quick look at today's slightly changed agenda. First up is Gavin Reed from Human Security. He will walk us through the BADBOX 2.0 campaign. And then we will hear from Xander Franse from the CCB. He will give us a deep dive into the Q3 threat landscape. And after a short break, we'll be back with James Mason from Recorded Future, followed by Robert Lipovsky from ESET. And finally, we will wrap things up with a few closing words and already look forward to the next QCTR in January. And with that being said, let's roll. Our first speaker is Gavin Reed. He's CISO at Human Security, and Gavin has been on the front lines of cyber defense for years. And today he's bringing us a wild story, the BADBOX 2.0 campaign. Imagine threat actors backdooring consumer devices at manufacturer and building their own fraud ecosystem. It is as bad as it sounds. Gavin's going to unpack how this campaign works, how it targets the entire customer journey, and why it's so hard to stop without the right protection. So, Gavin, if you're ready, take it away.
Excellent. Hey, thank you so much. Welcome to all the folks listening. Thanks for the invite. This has been a fun investigation. So, as mentioned, I'm Gavin Reed. I'm the CISO of Human Security. I've got a number of teams underneath me, including the threat intelligence function, which this particular group looks at, attacks to the internet, how our product does against those attacks, and then how we don't stop there. Like, how do we actually demonetize these attacks so that they're not available for use by the threat actors in any way whatsoever? And we're going to cover one today, which is BADBOX 2.0. And as mentioned, this is a very, very widespread attack. And if you could think of, people always wonder, like, I've heard that bringing in these cheap IoT devices into my network isn't a great thing. And, it just instinctively sounds like it's not a smart thing, but there hasn't been a lot of real world examples of how this can be scaled and how it can be used against people en masse. And BADBOX 1 and BADBOX 2 are definitely really good examples of why you should kind of think about what you put on your network, and there may be some unintended consequences that we'll go through as we go through this talk today. So, these are basically Android open source devices and some Android applications. And the threat actor group that we've been following is definitely based out of China. So these folks cash out in multiple different ways using these boxes. And the ones that we're going to talk about today, now it's not limited to that, but these are what we saw in this particular, what we saw and what we mitigated in this particular campaign. So programmatic ad fraud, click fraud, proxy jacking. And then, it's important to note that while we saw these being used, we did get some glimpses into their back end, sometimes by some poor OPSEC on their side, and found that there's a bunch of other ones that are just kind of waiting in the wings in order for them to use that as well. So, what we, where we came up, or where we found BADBOX 2 is that, we about 3 years ago uncovered another big fraud operation, which we called BADBOX. It was mostly ad fraud, and I'm not going to go into that today, only to say that as we presented the IOCs, like if we're going to do a research paper, we are not going to do one that does not, name and shame, that doesn't potentially get us sometimes into some legal troubles, that does not, have lots and lots of IOCs for people to then be able to do their own decision making about what the impact could be to them. And certainly that's the case with BADBOX. But when we do that, we typically keep one or two IOCs back that we can use to track these threat actors, knowing, in my one of my coworkers, Lindsay, often says that, this isn't going to go away as long as the guys can continue to make money from it. And so we knew that even though we had turned down this one technique in BADBOX 1, that they were going to come back. And so, if you think of what we might hold back from, public publication, these are IOCs that are very, very close to the group itself, right? So that we can sort of observe what they're doing. And that's exactly what happened in the case of BADBOX 2, is we started to see some signs of this sort of sleeping giant awakening. We, of course, start off, as I mentioned, we protect our customers first, but then, our job doesn't stop there. Our job continues until we can actually incentivize this for the threat actors. And this, like in today's world, it's always great if we can get, law enforcement and arrests, but given the global nature and the varying, penalties and geographies, often that's not the case. And so often what we're left with, especially in the private sector, is taking the money out of it, making it so it's not, there's no advantage to set up this infrastructure and use it. So let's go into a little bit about the numbers of BADBOX 2. And I'll start with saying BADBOX 1 we thought was really huge. BADBOX 1, we counted about 70,000 devices. With BADBOX 2, like with the visibility that we had first going into it, we definitely glimpsed over 1 million devices. Now, as other partners have gotten involved that have different visibility into things, we're seeing that this particular campaign is up in the tens of millions. So it's it's definitely a very broad-based campaign with numbers very really big. This is the largest CTV botnet, connected TV botnet that the world's ever seen. So how did that break down in different geographies? And this is a little different than BADBOX 1. BADBOX 1 was very targeted in Europe and United States, and you can kind of understand why that's the case, because what they're trying to do especially is to escape detection. And so if they're coming from, I don't know, unknown, or a country that maybe doesn't do a lot of commercial trading in the United States and attacking United States businesses, or using, a United States ad fraud, or emanating from United States residential proxies, then companies that are looking and that are paying attention to the IP addresses that access their site may block them, right? But if they're coming from inside of the United States, then obviously that's, so that really explained BADBOX 1 very well. Now, BADBOX 2, we saw, like everything that we saw in BADBOX 2 was really mitigations to how we stopped and found, detected, and mitigated BADBOX 1. And so one of the things they did is they started concentrating on some other areas that maybe don't have as, much viewability, as much visibility as the United States. And in particular, we saw a focus in South America here. And there's a couple of reasons behind that. Like, I mentioned that, the initial backdoor, or I didn't mention, but the initial backdoor to BADBOX 1 was factory installed, or very close to the factory. With BADBOX 2, we found that they've diversified from that, and more on that later. But why do people buy these boxes? Is it just because they're inexpensive, right? And certainly part of that's that. But what we did is we started looking into this. like particularly we looked at a couple of sellers inside of Brazil that were selling these, and what they were doing is they were getting these boxes from the factory, and they were putting on a bunch of their own software, mostly for streaming piracy. And so then they were selling these boxes as sort of, hey, you buy this box, you pay one time, and you get, free Netflix, free, Premier League, free Sky TV, free HBO, all of that stuff. And so there's a huge advantage for people, especially in countries where, those services can be very expensive, or maybe they're not even available, right? Like I can't buy Sky TV here in the United States, but I could get one of these boxes and watch all I wanted. So, there's a huge advantage in buying these. And the people that are reselling them, say in Brazil, I think we came across three big groups, which, obviously we shared with law enforcement in Brazil. They're probably unaware of the fact that they're already backdoored, when they go and kind of backdoor them as well. So, it's not just a supply chain hack like with BADBOX One. It's almost like a human hack too. What they're doing is they're hacking humans' interest in getting free media and then using that to have a wide and huge distribution of these boxes, which they can then use as stepping stones for other criminal activity. Let's see, go into the next one. So what sort of devices are these? Like we saw, a bunch of these CTV boxes. We saw a bunch of tablets. And like with BADBOX 1, I think we saw maybe 10, 15 different types. With BADBOX 2, we've seen hundreds of different types. One of the cool ones are these aftermarket car head units. If you don't, you want to get a new nav system for your car, you can buy one of these pretty cheaply off the local, sellers that sell this sort of stuff. And we saw those that are being also compromised by the BADBOX backdoors. And, again, very wide range. We saw a lot of T95s, and they've sort of grown up a little bit. We've seen a bunch of these TV mini sticks, a bunch of these CTV devices, tons of tablets, tons of different tablets, and then tons of sort of generic Android phones. And I think for BADBOX One, this was a bit of an aha moment for us when we found our first cell phone coming shrink wrapped from the cellular provider with BADBOX on it. We knew, oh man, this is something pretty significant. It's pretty serious. So, what does it look like? Kind of typical, the supply chain hack where they're getting sort of factory or near to the factory embedded or put on the phone. But I think they saw that was limited with BADBOX 1. So what they decided with BADBOX 2 is that they would also do the more normal types of malware infections, things like drive-by downloads. And so if you get one of these, if you have one of these cheap boxes that are not protected, if you get pulled into, like, let's say you're, I don't know, needing some RoboBox money, or, you want, extra time in the game you're playing, you may get pulled into one of these sites that says, hey, go here and download this and we'll give you free stuff. Well, that free stuff comes sort of bundled with BADBOX 2. So there's a way that they can actually infect devices after the factory and continue to update and infect devices even after they've left that supply chain. So again, kind of both human and factory supply chain infections. And then of course, once you connect your device up, it goes to a command and control, and we've seen this command and control have a lot of different orchestration as to different campaigns, what devices are part of it, what they're doing, and what type of criminal activities are they using to cash out money on these particular devices. Now, with BADBOX 1, we saw one backdoor, Triada, and then eventually going to Void. With BADBOX 2, we've seen hundreds of backdoors. They obviously realized, okay, people were looking for Triada and they could find BADBOX, so let's do just limitless. So we've seen all kinds of different ones. We've seen hundreds that are the same, but just slightly different, probably for tracking for campaigns and stuff like that. But again, they've looked at how we shut down BADBOX 1, diversified in order to escape detection with BADBOX 2. So yeah, one of the like big differences, but or the changes in BADBOX 2 is the biggest way they are making money is through reselling of residential proxy networks. Now, if you're not familiar with what residential proxy networks are, in my house, I could have some CTV devices. I, have a couple phones, and 99.9% of the traffic that goes through that is legitimate traffic that if you were, a Netflix or if you were a Walmart, you'd want to be able to sell to. You wouldn't want to block. But if I'm running a residential proxy, mostly unbeknownst to me, then people can ship small parts of data through there, and especially if they have millions of these, not persisting very long and just sort of going from device, 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 and they can kind of escape a lot of the detections that people are using, a lot of the sort of first level detections that people are using to, block what they know is spurious activity. Um, and so they become like a critical stepping stone for the bad guys and for the threat actors to use. And it's big business, right? They make a lot of money in selling this. And I think like when with BADBOX 1, they were mostly doing ad fraud, right? And they got turned off by us very quickly. We got rid of all of the publishers and the people that were doing it, and they could no longer make money. So they knew that they had to diversify and specifically do something that human wasn't going to be able to necessarily get in front of as easily. And so this proxy network was a an amazing thing. And you see there of the ways that they're using this proxy networks, and you can see that they're doing ad fraud. And yes, bad boxes were getting high off their own supply. They were actually using other bad boxes to push through ad fraud as well. And then all kinds of other criminal activities. And like for the period of time that this was going, we were sitting on some of their exit nodes, and we were literally like, if we saw some attack type stuff going on in the news, we would look and we would see it going on in this huge bad box proxy network. And so, it was in a way kind of cool because we had a lot of visibility, but in a way also terrible because these boxes were just providing, ubiquitous access into countries and organizations. One of the big ones that was for sale is this IP MOU network. This is their commercial splash screen. Now, if you'd look for this, if you'd look for residential proxies, there are some, I'd say, quasi-legitimate residential proxies. I'm not sure I would even go that far, but you wouldn't find this one. This was really only being sold for and being used by bad guys. So this was, one of their biggest front ends for selling this data. We saw a couple of ad fraud campaigns. First, we saw these like smart TV boxes, and what they would do is, so you have this CTV box plugged in, and it just plays hidden ads the whole time. So you're not doing anything on your box, you're not using it, but ads are happening in the background that you can't see. And they were doing this thing called the evil twin, and we've seen this been used before. And what they do typically with the evil twin app is they'll have an app that's bad, right, that they're using, that does bad things, that does these hidden, ads and stuff. But then at the same time, these same threat actors upload good versions of this app to like the Google Play Store and stuff. And so if like someone like me that looks into these things goes and says, okay, I don't have access to the box, so I can see the app itself. Let me go on the Play Store and see if it's a bad app or not. I go to the Play Store, download it, and a bunch of ad requests. I go to the Play Store and download it, and it looks like it's a good app, right? So here's a couple of examples of these evil twins right in the Play Store. And one of the things we've noticed about it very quickly is tons of downloads, but no reviews. Like, so I don't know if they're auto downloading these things because, obviously then theirs shows up more if it's downloaded more. That's probably a likely scenario. They're probably using their residential proxies to do that. And here you can see on the left, the decoy twin, on the right, the evil twin. They look pretty similar, right? The one thing that you can say there is that there is no way to actually open the evil twin. So that's maybe an indicator that it's not a real app. And then again, the good or decoy twin on the App Store on the left and the evil twin on the right, you can see that there's no actual app icon. So there's no real way you can stop the app, The other big way that we saw was HTML5 games. And if you look at this site, you go to a site like this that has all these HTML5 games, and you click on them and try and play them. And you find, here's some examples a little bit more zoomed in. The humans can't play these games because there's just too many ads. Like, we would try and play them and it's impossible. Like, there's no human playing this particular game. It's only bots that are playing. We saw 1,000 of these, different domains, different websites used as cash out mechanisms. And then click fraud, right? Like, if you get an ad displayed at maybe 10 cents, if you get someone to click on that ad, then it goes up to $1, $5, $10, depending on the context. And here's an example of one. So people, not people, but these boxes would go and go to these ads, and they would have specific software embedded in them to click on where those ads are showing up. You can see there's ads on the left and the right side. This obviously looks very AI generated, and obviously it is. And no one's, again, really going to these sites. It's all just a cash out mechanism for the bad guys. So very quickly, some of our disruptions, this is the ad tech side. We saw it, and this is, one of the big reasons why we look for these types of attacks is we know that they could victimize our customers. And so, we put in some mitigations. They launched their own mitigations, came right back, bigger and badder. And then, we launched more, and we basically, through work with our partners and, our own mitigations, have pretty much shut off the ad fraud side of this, right? Unfortunately, that still left all of the capabilities for the proxy services to work just fine. And with that, we had some really good help from our friends at the Shadow Server Foundation. And we went through and identified and sinkholed all of the C2s that we could that were responsible for managing all of these devices. And so what you're seeing here, the numbers are actually higher now today, believe it or not. But this was like a couple of days after we did the majority of the sinkholes. And you can see there, like, there's, over 300,000 devices in Brazil that can no longer call home, right? And so, they start off doing some bad stuff, and then they very quickly lose capabilities because the bad guys have no way of actually contacting these devices anymore. So really amazing work in dismantling that C2 infrastructure that allows these proxy services to go. Now, as we're also working very heavily with, law enforcement. The FBI created this amazing warning that they sent out to all people because, at the end of the day, we can, we're playing whack-a-mole, right? We're, hitting the head of the Hydra, and it keeps coming back, as BADBOX 1 and BADBOX 2. The only thing that's really going to fix this is sort of understanding around, what you may want or not want in your IoT network, and then taking some personal responsibility for that. And then, of course, our friends that we work closely hand in hand in helped us with helping to dismantle this infrastructure by doing a lawsuit against some of the folks that we know are associated with the BADBOX 2 botnet. And as as I say there, this is Google's number there. They've seen over 10 million of these things. So, and with that, I've managed to take a 45-minute presentation and cut it down to 20-something minutes. And I have some time for questions if we have that capability. If not, I'll look in the chat after this and see if there's any and answer them. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Gavin. There's definitely room for a Q&A. BADBOX 2.0 sounds like a proper nightmare, except for that it's reality. Let's jump into some questions. The first one is there any attribution of BADBOX 1.0 and 2.0 to any specific group or state actor that is behind this? And I already saw that there are individuals in China that have a lawsuit coming up, but maybe you can tell a little bit more about that.
Yeah, obviously, yeah, we had really good attribution, high confidence attribution to some of the commercial groups that are behind this, both with BADBOX 1 and then continuing on to BADBOX 2. We've shared that with the appropriate groups in law enforcement globally. We've been working, with local, regional, national law enforcement, with Interpol and with others. So it's a tough thing, right, to do. It's a very big group. I think if you talked with those groups in China, they probably consider themselves commercial entities, business entities.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sort of living maybe in a little bit of a gray area for the laws in China today. Yeah.
All right. And there's a second one from Dimitri Gesquier, if I'm saying that right. BADBOX 2.0 shows how fragile hardware trust really is. Do you think the concept of trusted hardware still makes sense, or should we move toward a model where every component is treated as potentially hostile by default?
Yeah, the real problem here is that so why do people not just buy an Apple TV? Why don't they buy a Roku? They wouldn't have any of these problems. And the real issue is that consumers are voting with their money, and they're saying, if I can buy this box for $35, I don't want to buy this one for 50. And so if you think of, oh, well, regulation and further monitoring and stuff is going to help, well, that's just going to cost more money. So I think to your question, I think we have to think of other ways that we can do that. And thinking, like, I know in my own network, I think of all these devices, all of my Philips Hue bulbs and stuff is untrusted, and treat them as such. Put them on their own network, give them very, very limited access to anything at all. Unfortunately, that involves a lot of setup and a lot of know-how. So I'm hoping, if nothing else, that some of these, Wi-Fi providers, these single home router providers start doing that by default, where they can identify, specific devices that they know are trusted, and then everything else goes into this default bucket category that can't do things like open proxies and some of the stuff that BADBOX takes in account for. Because realistically, waiting for this to be endemically fixed in the consumer realm is going to be tough.
Yeah, understood. There is one more question left in the Q&A, but I would like to ask you to maybe answer that in written form because we have to move on to the next speaker.
Perfect, thank you.
But thanks again, Gavin. It was eye-opening. Now let's move on to the next speaker. It's Xander Fransen, CTI analyst at the CCB. He's also stepping in today for another colleague. In case you're listening, Katerina, get well soon. Xander will guide us through the cyber threats landscape for Q3 2025. It will include trends, metrics, and recommendations straight from the CCB's vault. Xander, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Caroline, for the introduction. So let's dive into the threat landscape from Q3 2025 from Belgium. I'll try to provide you with the latest trends and metrics that we observe and some general recommendations for each of those. So let's start with the evolution of cyber incident notification we received in Belgium. So the graph on the slide is showing you the incident notifications we receive every month since August 2023. In the last quarter, we received 159 notifications, where 143 were related to cyber incidents. This is very similar to what we saw in Q2, which was 158, so one less. In Q3, so of this 159 notifications, there were 75 for NIS2 regulated entities, where 55 were classified as essential and 20 were classified as important entities under NIS2. And these incidents would share exposure across all different sectors for NIS2. There is no one sector being targeted much more than the others. But since there are only 75 for NIS2 regulated entities, that means that the majority of the notifications we receive are from organizations that are not subject to NIS2. So this shows again that cybersecurity risks are systematic and certainly not limited to organizations that fall under these NIS2 restrictions. This was also a trend we observed in Q2, that we increasingly get these kinds of voluntary notifications, and we believed that this increased the increased focus on NIST may have prompted this additional report from our organization as well. And we hope that this reflects an increased trust in the CCB, with more and more companies now voluntary reporting incidents. And this is also a previous significant change from the previous year, with a 96% increase since before the NIS2 directive. So when we start breaking up these incidents into the different types, we see that account compromises dominated the Belgian threat landscape. Although these can often be mitigated quite fast, these can lead to more impactful intrusions very quickly, and are often even a precursor to ransomware. In this setting, quick detection and mitigation is key. The second most reported, and also the one that we think is most impactful, is ransomware, where we had 23 cases reported in Q3. In the next part of the talk, we will take a deeper dive into each of these specific threats one by one. So we'll look into account compromise, ransomware, and the denial of service attacks we observed. So let's start with ransomware. Like we saw in the previous slides, we had 23 cases reported in Q3 to us, which may sound like a lot, but actually Belgium is doing quite well. If we look to the trend of the world, or even just Europe, the amount of ransomware cases is still going up, while in Belgium the numbers are stagnating or even decreasing. The top actors we saw in Belgium were Killen and Inc. Ransom, with both 4 cases, shortly followed by the Warlock Group with 3 reported cases, which is not very different than what we've seen in other countries as well. The main interesting thing is that the manufacturing sector keeps on being the most targeted sector in Belgium and even worldwide. Ransomware actors are financially motivated and always take the one that is easiest and the most likely to pay to limit their downtime. And here it is the downtime for many manufacturing companies that makes them more likely to pay. And some highlights, some new developments we've seen in ransomware is mainly the Warlock ransomware, which also had 3 cases in Belgium, now uses the tool self-exploitation, which is the 0 days in Microsoft SharePoint, and the increased use of AI by different groups. For example, the new ransomware as a service global group now offers affiliates an AI-driven bot, an AI-driven chatbot which does the negotiations for them in a mobile control panel. Then PromptLock was discovered by ESET and is the first ransomware strain that is powered by AI. So they use the OpenAI GPT 3.5 model to generate and execute malicious code in real time. Then there was a new ransomware gang, LunaLocker, which now extorts companies by threatening to turn their intellectual property into AI training data. Then at the end of each sector, I will try to give some recommendations. So we recommend strongly to have a good backup strategy, where we recommend a 3-to-1 strategy, which is always keep 3 copies of your data on 2 different media, with 1 being offsite. And these backups should be reliable and have regular integrity checks, and also verify that you can restore from these backups whenever needed. Have also an EDR on all your systems and keep them up to date. Then next, the one where we saw the most incidents reported were account compromises. And this, from the graph and the numbers we have, it seems to be growing every day. we have never seen this much account compromises in the past. And these account compromises can have a variety of impacts with data leak and exposures, disruptions by them using these credentials, financial fraud, using tactics like CEO impersonations, launch further phishing campaigns with trusted accounts. You can say fake invoices or thousands of phishing emails to their whole contact list. And lastly, these accounts are also sold to ransomware actors, which will seriously disrupt your organization. It is therefore key that you can respond very quickly on these kind of threats. So one of the main causes for account compromise remains phishing. On our email address suspicious@savonweb.be, which is an email address everyone can forward to their phishing to, we've received in the last quarter close to 2.5 million emails. And the graph below shows you the emails we received every day. So and on average, this amounts to more than 27,000 emails every day, which is close to 20 mails per minute. And from these mails, we've been able to extract 46,000 unique malicious URLs. And from those, 4,000 unique domains were tagged as malicious. And in collaboration with the ISPs, we were able to block those domains on a national level. So, but not only phishing emails with malicious websites is the main cause. There are also other ways to infect people with information stealers. In Belgium and even worldwide, Luma Stealer dominated the amount of credentials stolen this year, with Radamantis, Vidar, and Redline competing the top 4 in Belgium. These infections can happen in a variety of ways. From malicious attachments in these emails we received to fake updates, click fix, and whatever. So let me show you one example of one widespread case we've seen recently. So there was a Google ad campaign in June that was promoting malicious PDF editors online. There were multiple sites where you could download such a tool, which is displayed on the slide. And they also use SEO positioning to be top results when you search for something with PDF in it. And after the 60-day Google ad campaign ended, these PDF editors got weaponized with credential stealers, and we believe to be widely spread because of this Google ad campaign and the amount of incidents we had reported to us containing this malicious PDF editor. So if this picture seems familiar to you, we might want to refer you to our website where we provide some general guidelines what to do when you have this kind of infection. So in general, for account compromises, we keep on asking to use MFA wherever possible, since we notice in a lot of incidents that the attack could have been prevented if MFA was in place. Also, strong identity and access management is key, where you should revoke users and sessions that are no longer used. The continuous monitoring of account behaviors for anomalous login patterns is also important. If someone logs in to your VPN from another account through a VPN or from another country, you should seriously start asking questions. So, on the third place of the amount of reported incidents, we had DDoS attacks. And even though DDoS might not be a priority for everyone, they can still have quite a big impact. So this quarter, the hacktivist activity was shaped and started by law enforcement operation Eastwoods in July. This was a joint international operation by Europol, coordinated by Europol and Eurojust, and this was targeting the pro-Russian hacktivist group known as 057. This resulted in the disruption of their attack infrastructure, consisting over 100 systems worldwide, including some major server infrastructure. There were also several arrest warrants issued for members based in Russia, and Belgium was also supporting country in this campaign. But very soon, they started a new campaign with the time of retribution hashtag, and very soon Belgium was also being targeted in this campaign. So for a whole weekend, the same 16 organizations were targeted in government, mobility, and energy sectors. These had quite a low impact, and this can partly be explained by their loss of infrastructure, but also because they were targeting multiple countries at once, which is not always their modus operandi. Then we had the second wave in August, which was a 7-day campaign, and a total of 122 organizations spanning sectors government and public administration, finance, transport, logistics, energy, and all the rest were being targeted over 7 days. The public sector was the most impacted by the DDoS activity, accounting for almost 42% of these attacks. And these attacks were claimed by no-name 057 in alliance with the hacktivist group, The Alliance. Overall, the impact was pretty low, with temporary disruptions to several organizations, but no long-term vulnerability. Most of the organizations responded pretty effectively, also partly thanks to the support of CCB, because we reached out to all these 102 organizations and provided them with recommendations and block lists to implement. For recommendations on DDoS, I've listed a few here, but I would much more like you to refer to the Cyber Tips webinar we had last month on September 9th. If you missed that one, you can scan the QR code or click the link in the PDF where the recording and slides are available. Then also, it will not be a trend landscape presentation if I would not talk about some APT activities. Firstly, the amount of 0 days being exploited in the world has certainly not declined, with the vulnerabilities in SharePoint, Netscaler, and Cisco that kept us quite busy in the summer. At CCB, we try to do our best to identify and warn all the organizations that are vulnerable to these kinds of 0 days. Then I also wanted to highlight a new player in the European cyber threat landscape, the Donut APT group, which is believed to be an India-linked cyber espionage group. And according to a recent report by Trellix, they have been sending several spear phishing emails impersonating defense officials to several European foreign ministries for espionage purposes. So it's not always the big four, to say. And I've linked the blog below for everyone to take a look at if they want. And the last part, the last bit I wanted to discuss is supply chain, and which also had quite a big impact in shaping the Belgian threat landscape. Supply chain attacks can happen all the time and can be very impactful. And there are two recent examples that I wanted to highlight here. So you had the Salesforce Draft AI chatbot plugin, which was suffered a data breach, and several old tokens were leaked, where these old tokens could be used to exploit data for several organizations. As you might know, there was just an announcement yesterday evening about a data leak at F5, which seems to be kind of similar in in terms of the impact it might be able to have. But we are still assessing this information, and you can keep an eye out on our website for any info we can share. But it's definitely important to keep in mind. Then secondly, we had the Colon Aerospace ransomware case in September, which knocked out the check-in system for several airports. And this caused widespread travel disruption across Europe. But some airports had a backup system in place for their check-ins, and they were able to recover pretty quickly. So this shows that if you have a strong third-party risk management program and a clear view on your software supply chain, you can try to limit these kinds of attacks as much as possible. Then lastly, I would like to finish with the outlook for the upcoming quarter or even next year. So we believe that there won't be any significant changes in the upcoming quarter. Ransomware and account compromises will still remain the main threats. And I don't believe that the spike we saw in Q3 or even in September will go away soon. Small and medium-sized entities will remain popular targets, and with phishing and vulnerability exploitation as being important initial access factors for different cyber criminals. Thirdly, we want to stress again on this third-party risk and the supply chain within your organization. Test your security of open source software you use and keep them up to date. And lastly, as always, the geopolitical tensions will continue to shape the future of the cyber threat landscape. And with that, I hope this presentation was useful for some of you, and I will pass the word back to Caroline. And if there are any questions, you can put them in the chat, and there are many colleagues of mine here that will be able to share them, answer them for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Xander. That was a great overview. We had a few complaints regarding the sound quality.
Oh, no.
So not content, that's good. But indeed, like Alexander said, it was a very last minute switch. Normally we make sure that everyone has a good proper microphone, so we have good sound. But this was, the best we could do at the very last minute. So hope for your understanding here. There's also another question that I saw in the Q&A. It was about whether there are any organizations that have been sanctioned or investigated by the CCB following the reporting of a cybersecurity incident under the NIS2 directive. We don't have any NIS2 colleagues in the call right now, but we have a webinar tomorrow. My colleague will probably post it in the chat right now. It's about 1 year NIS2 and Siphon 2.0. So if you have the time, you can either join the webinar tomorrow. There will also be a recording, so you can always look back and otherwise ask the question to us by email. That's also possible. All right. And now, folks, it's time to take a breather, stretch your legs, grab a snack, refill your coffee or beer. We don't judge. And we'll see you back in 10 minutes sharp. And as always, we have a riddle to solve during the break. The riddle for this time is, why did the IT guy bring a letter to work? I'm curious for your answers. Don't go too far. We've got AI and espionage waiting for you after the break. See you in a bit. Bye-bye. Welcome back, Cybercrew. Hope you're refreshed and ready for round 2. I saw some great suggestions coming in for the riddle. Why did the IT guy bring a letter to work? The answer is because he heard the network had too many layers. Anyway, our next speaker is James Mason, intelligence consultant at Recorded Future. and his talk is about Gen AI, use cases for attackers and defenders. AI is changing the game, and James is here to show us both sides, good and evil, and using it to their advantage. Sorry, to their advantage. James, if you're ready, take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you, Caroline. I'm ready. And I enjoyed the riddle as well. Thank you for that. Yes, so I'm James, and I'm going to talk a little bit around generative AI, looking at some of the use cases for attackers and defenders. So in terms of an agenda, I'm going to start just looking at just what is the actual uptake of AI, and specifically generative AI more generally. And then we'll dive into some of the use cases which we're seeing offensively, as well as some of the defensive use cases, and then looking more towards what we can actually expect going forwards. So the assessment today really is that AI is enhancing human operators, but it is not yet replacing them. Yet being the key word here. But the reason for this is that when we look at more fully automated operations, the technology for this is still just somewhat lacking. So I think anyone who's been using AI tools themselves, day-to-day operations, will probably understand and sympathize that whilst AI is capable of doing many, many amazing and brilliant things, it is also capable of hallucinations. It's capable of not quite giving us the outputs that we are expecting or that we're wanting. So this is still technology which is developing. And this is why we're not seeing this really being used at large in some fully automated operations. So we're still requiring a human in the loop for a lot of operations today. So overall, what we are seeing is that AI usage is a force multiplier. And this is true both of some of the lower level threat actors, as well as some of the higher end, more sophisticated APT groups as well. And also for us defensively, this can really enhance our own operations. So also, just while we're discussing the general uptake of AI, we can see from the chart here that in recent years, it's been a relatively flat line in terms of AI usage. But it's only after the public release of ChatGPT and other AI models from late 2022 onwards, this is where we really start to see organizations really adopting AI. So we can see here that we've got comfortably over 70% of organizations globally who are all using generative AI for at least one business function. And this just demonstrates really a high level of uptake, which has happened in actually a relatively short space of time. So this is just over the space of a couple of years that we're really seeing such a high level of adoption. So this is certainly going to increase, and by 2026, we'll expect this to be well into the 80% and above. And this is hardly surprising given the gains that there are to be had from generative AI. So statistics will vary wildly, but on average, we can expect generative AI to complete tasks around 40% faster and with 18% higher quality. But again, statistics will vary massively on this depending on the tasks involved. But with such gains to be had, it is little wonder that attackers too are looking to leverage this and to streamline their own operations. So I think when we look at threat actor usage, it's always important to remember that these guys are not looking for the most innovative use case. They're not looking for the most exciting usage of AI. They're still just trying to steal your money or access your data or compromise your network or whatever it may be that they're looking to do. And they're simply looking for the easiest, quickest, and cheapest route to do that. What another big caveat with the attacker use cases is that as much as we might like to, we don't always know exactly threat actor methodologies. So we are reliant on some of the data sources that we do have access to. Also instances of operational security mistakes on the part of threat actors. But we certainly don't have the full picture by any means. So there will certainly be usage that we are not yet aware of. And before we actually look at the use cases themselves, I just want to ask the question of how threat actors are actually engaging with AI tools. So what are they actually using? And more often than not, they are using exactly the same tools that we are using in our day-to-day roles. So this is ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Llama, whatever it may be that you're typically using. And all of these publicly available tools, they have guardrails in place. And these guardrails are designed to prevent any malicious usage, which is all well and good, but there are actually many ways that threat actors can start to get around these guardrails. So this is the art of prompt engineering and jailbreaking, so to jailbreak out of these guardrails. So some of the ways that we see this being done is through role-playing and multi-step prompting. So these sorts of attacks where you can present an AI chatbot with a hypothetical or perhaps even a fictional scenario. So if I were to go to ChatGPT and say, could you write me an exploit for this particular CVE? ChatGPT will very likely say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to perform that action. Whereas if I were to be a little bit more inventive and say that I'm doing this as part of a legal pen test exercise, ChatGPT might be more inclined to give me what I'm looking for. Or if I were to say that I was writing a novel or a thriller where I needed some in-depth detail on how a cyber attack might be carried out. So by being inventive, we can start to get around some of these guardrails. And then there's also some more complex attacks looking at the actual logic around these guardrails and some of the policy attacks. So you can actually try to engage with chatbots to pose as a developer who is deploying a policy update to try and remove or amend some of these guardrails. So slightly more complex attacks in that regard. But what's really interesting with this is looking at that chart on the right, there's a real big spike in sort of early 2024. And this is just looking at all of the how-to guides being shared across criminal forums. So really interesting to always gauge what's being discussed and what's being chatted about across some of these dark web and criminal forums. Whilst the vast majority of what is on the dark web is often total rubbish, this can also be a really good gauge of what's being discussed and where the areas of focus are. So we can see a big spike like this. We can really see very clearly that threat actors are focusing and discussing on AI models and how they can leverage them. And as well as using some of the more publicly available tools, a lot of these threat actors can actually access malicious tools which are available via dark web, criminal forum channels themselves. And these typically are tools which are created by threat actors for threat actors. So they have no guardrails at all in place. The reason you might want to go for a publicly available tool is that there is a lot more resourcing, a lot more funding that goes into the LLMs behind them. So they are a much more powerful tool. So your end result might be of a much higher quality. But if you're struggling to get around the guardrails, there is always the option of simply using malicious tools which are without guardrails and available on some of these dark web and criminal forums. So that's a quick look at how threat actors are actually accessing some of these tools. But once they've got through that first hurdle, what are they actually using them to do? So there's the honest answer is there's many different aspects here. But when we look at generative AI, there's essentially 5 key areas. So we can use generative AI to generate code, to generate text, and to generate image, video, and voice, which collectively are deepfakes. So when we look at code, we've seen some mixed results on code. Certainly we're seeing evidence of threat actors who are successfully asking AIs to generate aspects of code, particularly successful when they're tweaking or developing existing code, but typically writing entirely new code or malware from scratch. This is where we start to see AI models hitting their limit a little bit, for now at least. But one of the areas where we're seeing really huge gains is in social engineering. So this is generating text and also generating deepfakes. So phishing is, of course, nothing new. And with the success of phishing amongst threat actors, we've seen a big emergence of phishing as a service tools. So the image I've got here is from Darkula, which is a phishing kit that was put together by some Chinese threat actors. And Darkula has been around for a little while, but it's only relatively recently that they have started to incorporate AI capabilities within this phishing kit. And the result here is that anyone wishing to make use of this tool, they simply need to know the URL of the victim organization that they wish to target, and they can plug that into the phishing kit, and it really starts to do all of the work for you. So it'll generate your phishing lure. It can use AI to do this and make it extremely convincing. It can then start to send out your campaign at scale. It can change it into multiple different languages and maintain that level of that high quality convincing level. And you can also interact with it to set different filters for what actually appears on your phishing page. So all of this is really just lowering the barrier to entry. So a threat actor with really very little skill or knowledge can start to send out some really very convincing phishing campaigns. And I think it was assessed it was around 2023 where the overall volume of phishing campaigns increased by around 12 or 1300%, which shows really a massive increase from 2022. So whilst we can't say for absolute certain that every single campaign was leveraging AI, the correlation of the timing of publicly available tools such as ChatGPT being released gives a very strong indication of AI really increasing the volume of phishing attacks and also the effectiveness of them. So as well as phishing, there's also deepfakes. And again, deepfakes come in many different shapes and sizes. So the example I've gone with here is looking at face swap technology. So this is where you can actually interact remotely with your victim. And rather than having a pre-programmed video of someone else, you can actually interact yourself with the victim, but with someone else's face and voice superimposed over yours. So you can have a very, very lifelike and realistic conversation with your victim, which is really just making these social engineering attacks much more effective. Again, we've seen evidence of threat actors who are providing how-to guides and tutorials on how you can leverage just very easily accessible tooling like the ones here on the screen. Given it's such a new technology as well, there's very few guardrails in place around how these tools are being used. So again, really just lowering that barrier to entry for threat actors. And as well as social engineering, we've also got deepfakes really being used for executive impersonation. There's bypassing multi-factor authentication. Also disinformation is another angle that we've probably all experienced and seen across various headlines. So the use cases here are multifaceted. So that's a look at how AI is being used to lower that barrier to entry. But I think it's also important to understand that it's not just at the lower end, but also right up at the sort of sophisticated APT end of the spectrum. So, for example, Iranian state-sponsored groups, we've known for a long time that they're very good at creating sophisticated social engineering campaigns. But increasingly, we're seeing evidence that they're leveraging AI within these campaigns to make them even more effective and to streamline their operations. So overall, we're seeing the quality of Iranian phishing lures are actually improving. So they're containing much fewer errors, much more fluent than they used to be. And all of this is geared towards much slicker operations and much more effective and convincing campaigns. And then likewise with some of the Chinese state-sponsored groups. So they've long been known for their living off the land attacks. So rather than introducing entirely new malware into a victim organization, which is much more likely to be detected, they're actually relying on existing tooling to see if they can manipulate that to maintain some level of persistence within an organization for espionage purposes. And a really interesting use case here where they are, they've been observed actually troubleshooting some of the tools and systems that organizations have within their tech stack. So Impacket and some other tools have been observed with this, and they're just trying to understand these tools and see how they can actually maintain some persistence for espionage purposes on them. So just to show that it's, yeah, not just the lower end, but also up at the more sophisticated end of it as well. And with all of these use cases, we can start to understand how threat actors are leveraging AI at various different stages and steps within the cyber kill chain. So whether we're looking at reconnaissance, whether we're looking at using LLMs to help parse combo lists for valid credentials, whether it's for defensive agent purposes, these tend to be sort of fairly isolated steps within the wider goal. But I think what's important with all of this is that for now, at least, we do still need that human in the within the loop part of the process. So we still need a skilled human in there. We're starting to see more evidence of threat actors pushing the boundaries of this. So we see various failed attempts. For example, threat actors looking to actually write malicious script from scratch, or perhaps to develop DDoS capabilities. And this is where we see a lot of AI models reaching their limitation, for now at least. But interesting to note how they are pushing the boundaries here. So this is certainly the sort of direction that we can expect some of their usage to go in. So that's a little look at what we're seeing on the attacker side. But what about us on the defensive side? So I think we're all in much the same position where there is an awful lot of data out there, and I have yet to meet the organization that isn't struggling with resourcing constraints. And then we add into this the fact that we have motivated threat actors who are now also AI enabled. So how can we actually start to use AI first for threat intelligence? Well, we've already discussed how threat actors are using AI at each step of the cyber kill chain. Well, so too can we start to leverage AI at each stage of the intelligence cycle. So when we look over at collection, for example, AI models are very, very well tuned towards pulling in vast data sets. And this can all be processed, exploited at scale and at speed. And this really helps us with our analysis and production. We can very quickly and very easily start to generate a range of reporting which can be geared more towards strategic, operational, tactical audiences. And all of this is ultimately helping to drive much more timely and better informed decisions and actions. So all geared towards reducing risk across the organization. And then just to look at some more of the specifics of where we can start to leverage AI a little bit more, if we look at threat detection and response. So again, AI is very well tuned when we look at anomaly detection and behavioral analysis, so far more capable than humans. We need to sleep, we need to rest, we miss things, whereas AI is very, very good at picking out anomalies, outliers within vast data sets. When we start to couple this with automated incident response, we can really understand how we can start to identify issues very, very quickly, but also contain them and isolate them so that we can actually start to isolate those problems before they pose any greater risk to the organization. Pen testing and red teaming as well. We know that threat actors are leveraging AI against us. So absolutely, we should be building this into our pen testing and red teaming. So we've seen evidence of threat actors using AI for vulnerability scanners, for reconnaissance purposes. So this should absolutely be built into our attack simulation. And also one of the most time-consuming elements of the red teaming is often the analysis and reporting, actually getting decisions off the back of it. But this can all be done far more quickly. So leveraging AI to actually get our analysis and reporting far more quickly to drive results. So too on the threat intelligence side. So again, driving those better informed and quicker insights can really boost productivity. And this can also really help with our knowledge sharing across industries if we have those insights in a much more timely fashion. Also, using AI to go through vast previous and historical data sets, this can also really help us to look ahead at what we're likely to expect going forward, which leads nicely onto Outlook. So this is absolutely a rapidly evolving space. What we can be certain of is that going forward, we're going to be seeing a lot more automated attacks going forward. What's harder to predict is exactly the nature of these attacks and what we're going to see and exactly when it's going to happen. So the timeframes are relatively uncertain at this stage. But some of the sort of key areas that we're expecting to see a lot more attacks going forward will be looking around polymorphic malware. So the example there on the screen is of Black Mamba. This was a POC, so created by security researchers, a malware that is capable of changing its underlying code to evade detection and also operating autonomously. So no need to communicate with a C2. Also AI agents being used maliciously. The example here would be if I tasked an agent to exploit a particular CVE, I'd give it a tool set and it would go ahead and try to exploit that particular CVE. And either it's going to be successful and the process completes, or if it's unsuccessful, it simply goes back to the start, reassesses, it might need some additional tooling, and then it goes again. And all of this happening very, very quickly. So really reducing the time to exploit, particularly for new CVEs. And then data poisoning as well. Data poisoning, we are seeing a lot of this already. Certainly some Russian actors been observed flooding news sources, social media with falsified information in the hope that this is then starting to be picked up by LLMs, which then start to present that falsified information, not necessarily understanding that it's misinformation. But when we start to see this in the context of AI agents being used across organizations, we can start to see how by poisoning the actual data sources themselves, this could then be propagated very quickly and at scale. So I think I'm up on time, so I shall wrap up very quickly, but a couple of key takeaways for us there. So AI really acting as a force multiplier at both ends of the spectrum, but can really help us on the defensive side, and a few future threats there. Some more automated attacks coming forward and attacking with the AI ecosystem. But that is all that I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Super insightful. Gen AI is clearly playing for both teams in this game, I guess. We are kind of over time. There is one question in the Q&A section, but I would like to ask you if you could answer it in written form. So it's also a rather complex question. So it's probably easier anyway to answer it in the section itself. Is that okay for you?
Yep, absolutely. I shall
All right.
look now and I shall try and get an answer back.
Okay. Thanks again, James.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Now, last but definitely not least, we have Robert Lipowski, Principal Threat Intelligence Researcher at ESET. His presentation is titled, "You Will Always Remember This as the Day You Finally Caught FamousSparrow." Kind of already sounds like a movie trailer, right? But this is a real life cyber threat hunting at its finest. So Robert, if you're ready, we're ready to hear your story.
Yes, I am ready. And can you all hear me? I think I should be live.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So yes, we're going to be talking about a case study of a China-aligned APT actor that we track as FamousSparrow. And it's also going to be an interesting backstage view in some of the APT tracking and some of the attribution mess that we have to deal with. So this might possibly have something to do with Salt Typhoon, and hopefully this will be interesting. So Salt Typhoon, I'm pretty sure needs no introduction. I mean, it's only been the #1 cybersecurity news, especially in the US, since around last September, as it targeted all the big telcos and ISPs. But it wasn't just in the US. The targeting was actually worldwide and hit many other, primarily telco operators, but also some other industries as well. So what does this have to do with our subject, with FamousSparrow? Well, if you look online, you might find that, or you'll find claims that FamousSparrow is ESET's name for Salt Typhoon. Well, today I'm going to be questioning those claims because it's just not that simple. So, and to confuse you even more, two other APT names come into play. That is Ghost Emperor and Earth Estries. So these are all somehow related. They might be related. I'll say just that for now, and I'll come back to this at the second part of the talk. So we have been tracking the FamousSparrow APT since 2019. And we've observed that they were becoming more and more active in the past year or two. So last year, we discovered that they compromised several organizations, for example, a research institution in Mexico, a US organization in the financial sector, and the campaigns continued this year as well. So we've seen targets in Mongolia, Japan, in Taiwan. So unsurprising targeting there. But also what was kind of interesting is that we observed something that appears as a Latin American tour of sorts. So we've seen them compromise various high-value organizations in Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, Ecuador, and in Argentina. Now, we can only speculate about the true motivation of the threat actor targeting these countries. So in Panama, there's, if we look at the geopolitical context in Panama, there's the situation with the canal. For Guatemala and Honduras, it could be for their diplomatic or commercial ties with Taiwan. For Argentina, it could be related to the tensions around Chinese boats illegally fishing in Argentinian waters. And China's interest in Ecuador could be for various reasons, like the new president strengthening ties with the US, perhaps monitoring Ecuador's debt to China. Really hard to say. But let's take a closer look at the intrusion in that US financial organization that I've mentioned. So the discovery of that incident was noteworthy for various reasons. One of them was the geographical focus, because in the past we've seen FamousSparrow targeting organizations all over the world, but the US wasn't particularly in their crosshairs before. Well, that is if you don't count the Salt Typhoon headlines, of course. That is if they're related, but no spoilers just yet. So this US organization, it was a high-profile target. It was a trade group, excuse me. It was a trade group, a financial association that does lobbying. It has many prominent banks, brokers, asset managers, and other financial institutions as their members. So again, in this case as well, we can only speculate why they targeted this organization. But as I said, this association has some really big name members. So it's also possible that this trade group wasn't the final target, but it's possible that some of the members were the real targets and that this particular incident was a stepping stone to compromise them. So the good thing for our investigation was because our visibility via EDR, we were able to track the development of the whole intrusion. We were able to collaborate with that victim, help them remediate the incident. And through that, we got a lot of really valuable insight into how FamousSparrow operates, that through just regular tracking of their arsenal, but without actually doing the IR we didn't have prior to this. So the organization, it has a network environment of a couple hundred seats. Out of those, a few dozen are servers, and that's what the adversary was particularly interested in. So they weren't so much interested in the regular workstations. Now, part of this infrastructure was protected by our solutions. Some of those machines were not, unfortunately, and this actually played a pretty important role in the lateral movement that the adversary was doing. So the entry point into the environment was a web server, and the adversary was tunneling through it and then using it to move laterally to the other machines. So they were copying the payloads there through SMB, then using WinRM to execute them. And the way we could identify the compromised machines, the ones that didn't have any security software installed on them, was when we saw the adversary pivoting from them to the machines that were protected. So we saw those unprotected machines as source IP addresses where the lateral movement was originating from. So we were gradually installing our software on them, removing the malware, then identifying more infected machines, remediating those. Essentially, we were playing whack-a-mole with the adversary. Now, what's interesting is also from a discovery point of view, this isn't so much to speak about our capabilities, but I think it's an interesting backstage look at how we were able to identify such an incident from two different angles. So two different teams spotted the detections in our telemetry. So our MDR team spotted that web shell executing some initial commands and some PowerShell. I'll talk about that in just a second. And separately, our threat intel team spotted DLL sideloading that was abusing VLC, which triggered some of our tracking rules. And then, of course, these two teams collaborated, and we were able to help the customer. We contacted them, and we agreed to help them do the IR and remediate the threat. So as I said, the initial access vector appears to have been a web shell on that web server. Now, we can't say for 100% which exploit was used to deploy it, but considering it was running an outdated version of Windows Server and Microsoft Exchange, our best guess would be proxy logon, because this was the vulnerability exploited by FamousSparrow also in some of the earlier cases that we tracked. So we examined the commands performed on that web server, and then we could put together the chain of events, how it went from that initial access to getting the actual payloads installed. So first they ran some discovery commands through the web shell, like who am I, ipconfig, and so on. Then the threat actor downloaded a batch script from their server, which you can see here. That deploys another web shell. Then the script searches for the installation directory of .NET Nuke, which is an open source CMS built on .NET, and then copies a second web shell there. By the way, this one, it doesn't have anything to do specifically with .NET Nuke, so that was probably just for masquerading. You can see small, but this is the web shell here. It's very generic. Inside there's a hash in one of the comments, which is the MD5 sum of pi to the 7th digit. So what looks like an Easter egg, or possibly something you can hunt for in your environments. So this .NET Nuke web shell, it'll start an interactive PowerShell session and then download finally these 3 files, which is the Sparrow Trident. So Sparrow is being deployed through DLL sideloading through this, what we call this Trident loader. And that's a legitimate, validly signed executable abused to load an intermediary malicious DLL, which then decrypts and executes the backdoor from this 3rd file. A very common technique used by, not exclusively by FamousSparrow, but for many other China line threat actors as well. So in this instance, that abused executable was an old version of the K7AV, but we've seen them abuse a bunch of other programs too, and I'll mention that a bit later. So persistence was established by installing the abused executable as a service. And here's one of the process trees that we've seen. This is an example of that K7 sideload being installed as a service. It launches Color CPL exe, which is the Windows color management tool, and then injects its loader into that. So what's interesting is that it took the adversary a little under 4 hours to go from that initial who am I command to getting the Sparrow payload installed as a service, which is interesting, and it's actually indicative of a very hands-on keyboard type of operation. It looks like they had the ability to make some decisions based on that, based on the reconnaissance that they did along the way. Now let's zoom in on this flagship backdoor of the group. We call it Sparrow Door, and to our knowledge, FamousSparrow is the only group that is using it. So here, very briefly, I will walk through the evolution of the backdoor or its versions over the years. So we released a blog post on our blog, welivesecurity.com, back in 2021. And then in 2022, there was an updated version which was documented by the British NCSC. And then it appears that there was something like a fork. So Trend Micro describes separate campaigns where the group, they're calling it Earth S-trees. So the group deployed Crowdoor and Hemigate. And based on our analysis, these appear to be the predecessors of the Sparrow variants that we've seen in this incident. So let's call them parallelized Sparrow and modular Sparrow. What's interesting is that both of these versions have been deployed in this single incident, and they're very different, but they appear to be developed in parallel. So we can't really say that like one would be a newer version from the other one, like they're being maintained simultaneously. In terms of functionality, the parallelized variant, I'll start with that one. It handles commands in parallel, each in their own thread, hence that naming, sockets, subcommands, and all that. So it's definitely based on the earlier Sparrow versions, but it's a visible improvement in terms of code quality and architecture. So it's more mature. At times, you get the impression that it's even over-engineered for what it's doing. So there are a bunch of various supported commands. I won't go over like the maintenance types of commands, which handle things like configuration, installation, uninstallation, but the actually notable ones are these 3. So it can do an interactive shell, it can handle file operations, and there's a TCP proxy. So this one was actually being used to do that lateral movement on the network, possibly opens up a way of doing orb network functionality. So here are a few TTPs used by the backdoor. These could be used as IOCs. For example, this interactive shell uses pipes with very specific names. And of course, we put other TTPs and IOCs as well. So if you're interested in that, we're more than happy to share. The other variant of Sparrow we detected is much leaner. So most of its functionality has been moved to standalone modules or plugins. Those are never written to disk, so they only reside in memory. It looks like this variant was built for stealth. It uses various anti-debug and anti-analysis features. It specifically collects information about installed security software, and then the operators can make decisions based on that. Remember, very hands-on keyboard type of operation. So again, this is executing from a location that should raise suspicion. Now, aside from Sparrow Door, which is their main custom backdoor, here are a couple of other tools that we've seen them use. So they've been using ShadowPad. So this, of course, is a well-known backdoor shared among multiple China line threat actors. But this was actually the first time that we've seen FamousSparrow using it. And if you think about it, there's a lot of functionality overlap in this tooling. Why are they using both ShadowPad and Sparrow Door, two different versions of it even? So there are several benefits, of course. Using shared malware complicates attribution. Also, it can act as a persistence backup. Possibly at some stage of the operation, they could be handing off to a different team that uses this other backdoor. Who knows? They've also been using PowerHub, which is an open source post-exploitation framework, along with the Pad Potato privilege escalation technique. And they also use this tool to dump LSAS memory, so credential dumping. And what's interesting is that they split it over two different DLLs. So this is probably to avoid detection and sandboxing. And one of those DLLs is sideloaded by a legitimate VLC component, which brings me to the various DLL sideloads that we've observed in this one incident. As I said, they use this technique quite a lot. So there was that K7AV, there was the VLC, there was also Fortimedia. We've seen an old Microsoft Office component being used for the sideload. We've also seen a Yandex voice assistant component, which is kind of interesting because this last one is an uncommon sideload, unlike the other ones, which are well known and previously used in many other attacks. So much for the technical overview of this incident. Don't have much more time to get into more details. If you're interested in this, we actually have a write-up on our blog by my wonderful colleague Alex, who's actually the lead researcher tracking this APT. So check that out if you're interested in details or in IOCs, whatever. So let's wrap up this part. So FamousSparrow, unlike Salt Typhoon, hasn't been getting that much publicity like since 2022, but as we've demonstrated, the group was not dormant. They've been improving their arsenal. They've been improving their TTPs. They employed various techniques to avoid detection, as we've gone over in the past couple of minutes. And now on to that second part, which is that question of attribution and to answer whether FamousSparrow is Salt Typhoon. So let's break it down. What we classify as FamousSparrow is this China-aligned cyber espionage actor active since at least 2019. As we wrote in that first blog post that we put out, they've been targeting many different organizations around the world. Their targets span governments, engineering companies, law firms, and rather prominently hotels, especially in the beginning. So that's a very broad mix of verticals. So it looks like they could be going after organizations with some sensitive information about people of interest or important customers. So if you think about that in this sense, the Salt Typhoon targeting of telcos, where they were going after sensitive metadata about customers' communication, it aligns nicely. But in terms of tooling and TTPs, well, that's a bit different. So we've seen FamousSparrow leverage the proxy logon vulnerability, like many other Chinese APT groups around that time. But what's typical and what's unique for FamousSparrow is that main signature backdoor that I mentioned, the Sparrow Door. And since FamousSparrow is its sole user, we cluster this activity around this backdoors deployment. Now, Salt Typhoon is the name used by Microsoft. It was first publicly mentioned in that Wall Street Journal article about the US telco hacks since September. There have been no mentions of Salt Typhoon prior to that. And if you read into that article, it relays claims by Microsoft that the threat actor is the same as FamousSparrow and Ghost Emperor, which is a threat actor that was described by Kaspersky in 2021. And this was the first public report that actually conflated these two groups. Now, both FamousSparrow and Ghost Emperor were documented around the same time in 2021. And back then, no one made the claim that they were the same. In fact, there are very few overlaps between them, like one shared IP and that's it. Many more distinctions. They each have their own custom tool set. So in our view, Ghost Emperor and FamousSparrow are two distinct groups. Now, the main issue is that no indicators as to how those links were made have been published. Salt Typhoon has been all over the news, but until very recently, which I'll get to in just a second, there were like almost no technical reports, at least no public ones. So Microsoft hasn't really been sharing IOCs or TTPs or provided detailed explanation for how that attribution came to be. And to muddy this mess even more, let's add Earth S-Trees to the mix. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the group that is tracked by Trend Micro. And this one does actually have some overlap with our FamousSparrow cluster. So because of that, Trend Micro has made that transitive link to Salt Typhoon. But as I said, again, we've seen no hard indicator to prove that FamousSparrow and Salt Typhoon connection. Now, to be clear, we're not disputing the links the other vendors have made, but we have to question them when we haven't seen the facts to back them up. We can only go on the data we have and on what's been published. So for now, we consider FamousSparrow its own distinct cluster with loose links to the other ones. And rather than conflating all the clusters into one, a better explanation for the links, in our view, is a shared third-party supplier acting like a digital quartermaster, a concept which is very common in the Chinese APT ecosystem. And so for those of you that have been watching this topic, I'm sure you saw that there's been a recent update to the story. So there was a report by the NSA and like around 20 other intelligence agencies from around the world, which is great that this finally came out after quite a long time. And I just have three comments to this report. So it focuses on the exploits and implants for edge devices like Cisco. We don't see an overlap with the activity we track as FamousSparrow, which is mainly malware for Windows endpoints. So this advisory, it's good, but it didn't add that missing link that we were waiting for. The other interesting observation in this report is that it says that at least 3 Chinese companies are named to be behind it. So one of them actually was already previously named and sanctioned back in January, but the 2 other ones are new in this report. And that essentially means that this Salt Typhoon thing is a very, very broad umbrella. And it confirms in a way that digital quartermaster hypothesis. And what's also interesting is that the report explicitly shies away from the Salt Typhoon moniker. So it means that it's not just a broad, but it continues to be a very messy umbrella. So if you're a bit confused at this point, it's okay. And the final thing I'll note on this is that the only way out of this mess, or generally speaking, and I know it's a cliche, but it needs repeating, please share IOCs, please explain your attribution so that we can all pivot on existing research and then augment it, expand it, and compare and benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. That was a thrilling deep dive into FamousSparrow's return. We have a question ourselves also. After spending some time dissecting this group, what aspect of this campaign surprised you most?
I don't know if it was really a surprise, but it was interesting to kind of follow how they were evolving. So back in 2019, when we were starting to track them, they were like this, I would say, APT group with mediocre capabilities. It was just one of many, didn't really stand out, but along those years, it was really visible as they have been maturing and adding interesting stealth techniques. For example, things I didn't even mention, there were also some ties with another malware family that deploys rootkit functionality as well. So that's indicative of like significant resources being put into this. So that's one of the interesting things about this.
So they're clearly evolving. And where do you expect Sparrow Door to evolve next?
I mean, I guess we can expect that evolution to continue. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean that their advance will be getting more and more advanced. So I mentioned that rootkit, for example. So I'll stick with that for a second. So we've seen that being used for some deployments, and then they got rid of it. Probably was more difficult to maintain. Just speculating here, of course. And in a lot of cases, we actually seen various groups simplify their arsenals, simplify their toolkits using a lot of commodity off-the-shelf tools instead of custom malware. So who knows what directions it will go next.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Was amazing talk.
Pleasure.
And hope to see you live next time. That would
Yeah.
be great. So everyone, that's a wrap on QCTR Q3. I would like to say a huge thanks to all of our speakers for sharing their insights, their stories, and their strategies. Also to our amazing audience, thank you for tuning in, listening and chatting and asking questions, etc. You make these events what they are, fun, informative, and you can really feel the community spirit. So thank you for that as well. Regarding the recording, it will be available on the CCB's YouTube channel next week, probably. My colleagues will post a link to the channel in the chat, or they already did. And then the only thing I can say is that we look forward to seeing you again in the next year. The next one will be on the 25th of January. So until then, stay safe, stay curious, and keep your cyber shields strong.